Ruark. Dr. Ruark is a senior research psychologist and team leader for the basic research program within the Foundational Science Research Unit, U.S. Army Research Institute for the Behavioral Health and Social Sciences, which is the ARI. During his 11-year career at ARI, he has completed multiple research projects in support of the U.S. Army to include development of a framework of emotional management. Dr. Ruark holds a PhD and MS in Industrial Organizational Psychology from the University of Oklahoma, Sooners, with a focus on leadership theory, emotions in the workplace, and statistics. Dr. Ruark is with us today to share his research findings on emotional intelligence and introduce EI concepts. Please welcome back to the stage Dr. Gregory Ruark.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Good morning again. So this time it'll be more of a pointed conversation where I will be introducing you to this idea of emotion management. Some people refer to it as emotional intelligence, emotional competence, emotional labor, emotion regulation. Many names, much overlap across all of them. So when I first came to ARI August of 2006, the very first thing I did was read then FM 6-22, which is now ADRP 6-22, Army Leadership. How many of you have read 6-22? All right, we got a lot of half hands, arms there again. So got to raise them up a little bit higher for me. If you have not read it, read it. Read it now, read it again, and then read it again. And continue to read it. It provides you an idea of what is required to be a leader within the U.S. Army. It also defines leadership as an act of influence. I like this concept because in reality that is what it means to be a leader, to influence others, particularly to influence others who are not necessarily on board with what you are wanting to do. The other key feature coming out of 6-22 is the idea that every soldier is a leader. Not just those who are formally designated because they have a commissioned officer status, but every soldier. Take a moment to think about that. Every soldier. Your senior NCOs should be leaders. In fact, your followers should be leaders. Together, collectively, you should be leaders. Therefore, it's important that you, as a formal designated leader, provide them with that development to ensure it happens. Because having everyone in the capacity to serve as a leader, when the moment calls for it, is a way to achieve success. The obligatory overview slide. I once tried to put together a PowerPoint deck for an Army audience. I left this slide out. I got chastised. So we got here, the obligatory overview. But what's the purpose? Demonstrate the role of emotions in effective leadership. Essentially what I'm going to do is ground it in human behavior. Why? Because each and every one of you and each and every person that you interact with, your followers, your peers, your supervisors, they're all humans. And what is one of the key characteristics of being a human? We emote. We have emotions. We can't ignore that. We have to recognize it, and we have to learn how to leverage it. And sometimes leveraging has a negative connotation, but in reality what it comes down to is striking the right balance of integrating across what I believe is truly makes up human behavior. Up to this point, you have had extensive formal education in terms of developing your cognition, K through 12. All of you are in undergraduate colleges and or universities presently. Once you enter into the U.S. Army, you'll also be involved with the structures put together by Army University. You immediately will go off to Bullock. You will get your formal classroom training in terms of what it is to be a leader, particularly how to think and behave like a leader. Missing from that is how to feel and how to influence in others the emotions. How does it feel to be a leader? Stop. Think. Put down 3 words right now in your notebook. How does it feel to be a leader? The third component, what I think makes up human behavior, is motivation. These 3 together in the right balance, assuming the correct context, because context is important, should achieve optimal performance, behavior, outcomes. Too much in one of these spheres, performance and the outcomes could be off. If you are purely cognition driven, then you're like Spock from Star Trek. In which case, whenever General Hughes sends me an email and it ends, please advise, I will reply back simply putting fascinating, period. And I'll leave it up to him to interpret what that means. On the flip side, if I am purely driven by emotions, then I am no better than Dwight Eisenhower at age of 10, who threw a tantrum on Halloween because his parents would not allow him to go out with his older siblings and trick or treat. What did he do? Ran out of the house, beat his hands extensively to a tree until they were bleeding. Purely driven by emotions. Now, this auditorium is named after Eisenhower. So at some point along his professional career, he developed the ability to manage and harness emotions that allowed him to be one of the most successful generals in our history, and to also to go on and serve as president of this great nation. But think where at age 10 he had started at. How many of you have younger siblings and you remember when they were 2 or 3 and they're crying out of control, throwing tantrums, right? So, but they're smart. In fact, they could be very emotional smart because they know exhibiting such type behavior at that age is acceptable, and it's how they are going to influence you to get something from them. However, at your age, that is unacceptable. But you know that, right? I hope so. These 3 factors truly is what I believe drives human behavior. In fact, my goal is, within 20 years, is develop a probabilistic model such that I'll have a confidence interval of 90% to predict what you are going to do. Not only in the next 2 seconds, but in the next 2 minutes and the next 2 hours. Why? Because I truly believe that's what drives human behavior. How many of you have seen this? Good. It's in 6-22. Center of Army Leadership, which is just across the way, up the hill. 2006 published 6-22, and they put out what they believed were the attributes and the competencies that comprises a leader within the U.S. Army. Very comprehensive. All right, check the box. Army values, empathy, warriors' ethos, discipline. You got presence, intellect, develops, leads, achieves. Minus 1 word up there, empathy. Emotions aren't explicitly drawn to attention, and yet research shows it impacts almost every one of those items listed up there. With that said, we still lack a formal education track to develop our emotional management abilities. Yet, it's vital. And sure, right now you're probably thinking, well, of course he's saying that because, I invested 10 plus years in the Army researching this. But the great thing about this, I'm not the only one who thinks that. Every one of these quotes comes from someone who wears a uniform, just like you. First one coming from, reported in the 2013 Chief of Staff of the Army Leader Development Task Force final report. Notice the phrase, emotional intelligence. Second one comes from Major Taylor Clark. And I misspelled her name in my PowerPoint, but citation is correct. My apologies to her. She wrote her thesis here, CGSC, on the topic of emotional intelligence, competencies, and the Army Leadership Requirements Model. It's available for you to read. I suggest you do so. Finally, in my quest to actually develop a framework applicable to you in uniform, I went out and talked with a lot of different soldiers. And one in particular, a captain, stated, we do this every day, from working with peers and followers to making decisions. People just like you who actually understand and recognize the need to incorporate emotional intelligence, emotional management within their everyday activities to be effective leaders. Not by mistake, this model's up again. Simply because I want you to draw your attention to bottom left-hand corner. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the model says they want you to achieve, get results. All right, how do you do that? Well, you work your butts off and you figure out what does work and what doesn't work. And that includes cognitions, motivations, and emotions. I'm going to ask for a volunteer. Here's the question. How long do you think we have been researching emotions, interested in this topic of emotions, in terms of trying to explain human behavior? Someone, how long? Yep. All right, a little bit longer than that. 500 years, all right. Is that longer, shorter? 500 years, one more person. Yeah. 50 years, all right. Well, this is Price is Right. 500 is closest, so technically winner. Oh, I got ahead of myself. So let's go back to that in a second. But first, why do we even care about emotions? So we have plenty of research, and considering the limited time I have to talk with you, I'm not going to go over it. I'm happy to send you citations in the future, but it's not hard to do your own research and figure this out. Plenty of research demonstrating the importance as it relates to leadership, teamwork, poise and confidence, trust and cohesion, strategic thinking. Wait a minute, what? Strategic, critical thinking and emotions are important? Emotion and management is important? Oh yeah, because you need that right mixture to understand. Again, can't be devoid of one thing at the expense of another. Emotions add value. Emotions help with understanding priorities. Emotions help to tune the way that people think and the lens that people look through. Now to get back to where I got ahead of myself. So, although 500 is closest, the fact is, it's been thousands. Philosophers have been talking about this since 500 BC. It's my favorite quote. Anyone can become angry. That's easy. But to be angry with the right person, to the right degree, at the right time, for the right purpose, and in the right way, that is not easy. Philosophers back then wanted to understand human behavior as it related to the warrior spirit, as well as why people committed evils and atrocities. They looked at emotions to try to explain this phenomena. So, for 500 points, who can tell me the philosopher that said this? All right. Now let's fast forward to the last couple of decades. The rise of the psychologist, if you will, where we believe we can measure anything. We can understand anything. Yeah, this fuzzy, invisible thing, yeah, give us time. We'll figure it out. And so smart people started to develop frameworks in terms of trying to understand why do emotions matter and why does it drive behavior. So one of the most commonly used ways to explain emotions is a circumplex model, and it's based on the two axes, where the vertical axis is about activation, the arousal level. Does it get you up and going? Are you ready to get pounding on something? Or is it making you crawl back into a corner? You want to just hide and shiver, stay underneath the bed or underneath the covers. On the horizontal axis is a pleasantness factor. Does it make you feel good? Does it not? Using these and using this quadrant system, we begin to understand how it can motivate behavior as well as attitudes, which as a foundational point also starts to get at influence. Emotional labor is one framework in terms to understand how it impacts your daily life. Particularly, this one is grounded in work. I myself am very attracted to this framework, largely because I had 7 years of business within the restaurant, where my livelihood was based on tips. I learned real quick that the better that I managed my emotions and was able to also influence the emotions of those that I'm serving, the more money I made. That's very motivating, right? As a 14-year-old trying to save up to pay for my college, that was hugely motivating. It didn't matter what I felt inside. I had to be this happy, shiny person in order to maximize my tips. Does this resonate with you guys? Particularly those in the restaurant business, right? How many of you have ever successfully waited on a table when you had a bad day and they're like, hey, you greet them, hey, what's going on? They're like, how are you? Well, I'm miserable, how about you? Does that work? Does that even work passing someone in the hallway? Absolutely not. Why? Because it's governed by norms. Norms established by our society, the occupation, and the organization. So within the profession of the Army, think of that. What are those norms? And related to that, what are the display rules and the regulations? If you're having a bad day, can you actually emote that? I'll be honest, in my office now, people are hesitant to ask me, how am I doing? Because years ago, I decided I'm going to tell them the truth. It takes a lot of energy to mask how you actually feel. I'm stressed out of my mind. I'm working 60 hours a week. I'm just fantastic. How about you? You know what? People stopped asking because that's not what they wanted. They wanted to just check the box. They wanted to be polite. Guess what? As leaders, don't do that. If you really want to know how others feel, then be prepared to know the truth and be prepared to not check the box and move on. But be prepared to spend the next 30 minutes if that person is actually not doing well, because that is your responsibility. Emotion regulation. This is actually the framework that I started using when I started my research in 2007, engaging captains and majors. Simply put, do you regulate your own emotions and how? And do you regulate the emotions of others? Now, in 2007, emotions was a dirty word. You can get around an EA, and every other word would be the F-bomb. But if you said emotion, whoa. I mean, whoa. Instantly, touchy, feely, whinies. We can't have that in the Army. Wait a minute, though. We're human. We have that in the Army. If you don't want that, then just create the Terminator force right now, right? So to break that barrier, my approach was I always use the analogy of a sports coach. So if you think about the most effective sports coaches out there, they're excellent as managers of emotions. And when it comes to human behavior, in this case performance, they're good at it. But let's think about this. When I say regulating emotions, what is your first reaction? Someone. What does that mean? Suppressing. Good. Right? Yes, no, disagree. All right. I need participation. I don't want to be talking to you. I want to be talking with you. Yes? I'm sorry, what? Hedging against. Okay. Yes. There are two parts to regulating emotions. Sometimes, using the terminology, ramp down, you need to ramp someone down. You got that person on your team who is all ready to go, excited. Oh, let's do this, let's do this. And everyone else is just kind of like, whoa, hold on, chill out. And it's disrupting the cohesion of your team. So you need to go over there and you need to bring that person down. In terms of a sports player, a lot of times that's a person in basketball who is so hyped up and in practice makes 100% of their free throws, but all of a sudden miss. So you need to ramp them down. Ramping up also happens too. Sometimes you have your star player who just doesn't show up for the game today. All the talent in the world, and they're just like, yeah, whatever. I can name a player right now, actually. Bryce Harper, Washington Nationals. Aggravates me. Doesn't run out every base, every hit, nothing. He just kind of lackadaisical do that. All the talent in the world is going to be making bank after this year. And yet, as a coach, anytime he doesn't run out of base, anytime he doesn't give his 100%, that coach has failed. You as leaders are going to encounter a range of soldiers. You heard it yesterday at the Q&A. You have excellent ones and you have ones that are just there. But you must influence them, and emotions are a way to do it. But bear in mind, sometimes you need to bring them down, and sometimes you got to bring them up, and you got to figure out what the right balance is. And this brings me to emotional intelligence, also emotional competence. Two predominant models. You have an ability-based model, which is all about skill-based. The second one is a trait-based. In reality, it's mixed. It includes a combination of both abilities as well as traits, predominantly personality traits. The major difference between these two, if you think about it, is we can train ability. We have more malleability to either instill ability or skills, as well as increase your proficiency in it. But as some believe that in personality, you're born with it, and that's a different debate and discussion that I'm happy to have with people, we can't impact that. If truly you were born an introvert, and there's absolutely no way that that can be changed, then that really limits the applicability of a trait-based approach. With that said, if you look at the two combined, you start getting a better idea of how you can actually enact and do emotional intelligence. And the workshop that will carry forth today and tomorrow, you'll have a hands-on opportunity to practice it. And that's good, and that's key. Practice is always important. But bear in mind, I have now presented with you essentially 3 different frameworks. And up to this point, and this is when I enter into the scene, I was pretty dissatisfied with what I saw. I kept looking at it and going, so how do leaders really do this still? Like, what is it about that? And where's the focus on the outcomes? All right, influence, right? All right, influence on what? On a task? Good. All right, let me get back to that in a second. So I enlisted the help of some very smart people, Dr. Seth Kaplan, Dr. Jose Cortina from George Mason University, to help me put together a model that is grounded in Army leadership. Everything about this model is derived from existing literature where we looked across the different frameworks to try to synthesize something that was usable. And then I went out and I talked to people wearing the uniform to make sure it jived, to make sure this is actually what you or you in the future will be doing, because that's important. That's the important of being able to translate research into applicability. So what we really focused on here that was a shortcoming in the other approaches are the outcomes. So you see proximal outcomes, you see ultimate outcomes. So what is implicit in there is the temporal component. Remember, we are humans. Remember what I said before I formally started this conversation with you, that you are a product of your experiences from birth. When you influence someone through the mixture of cognitions, emotions, and motivations, it doesn't stop right there. It carries forth. And it's going to impact others around that person too. And you have now started a new chain of events, if you will, that's going to lead somewhere. So the important takeaway here is that if you're exerting influence to get task A done, which is just the first objective of 10 to accomplish your mission, then you better think how that's going to impact 2, 3, 4 through 10. Because if you get it wrong in the beginning, then you're going to have to correct for it later. So it's that temporal component that we need to start thinking about. Yeah? Think about giving consideration to someone. Again, when I brought up the idea of, hey, be prepared to give 30 minutes to someone if you ask them how they're talking or how they're feeling, and you find out real fast that they're not doing well, and you don't have that time because you have a tasker, and you don't want to work until 2,000 hours again. So you say, okay, let's talk tomorrow. Now put yourself in that soldier's boots. My leader, who I just gave indications to, has decided that a tasker is more important than me. What's the implication? Exactly. Now, do you think that soldier will keep that to him herself? Or do you think back in the barracks, a conversation will start up? That's right. And who knows if it ends up on Facebook or Twitter or anything else. And you may never know as a leader. Maybe your senior NCO has to inform you what's going on. You've lost credibility and you've lost your influence. And by that time, what you're doing is essentially counting down into your next assignment. Unless you can figure out a way to undo that. So think about every action you do. It's daunting, isn't it? And we make mistakes. This is actually when developing that relationship with your NCO is essential. Because when you make a mistake, get help. They're down there dirty, all along with all the other subordinates. They're your best bet. But think about how every action has a reaction, has a reaction, has a reaction, because it doesn't stop. You have to start thinking 20 steps ahead and how your influence, your active influence in the moment impacts that. With all this said and done, you'll get there. You have, first of all, each other. Talk with each other. Okay? They're experiencing the same challenges as you. They're in the same developmental phase as you. Learn from each other. Leverage them. Find a mentor. Find someone who's good at emotional management. Find someone who is willing to tell you, ha, you sucked that up, but guess what? here's what I would have done, so let's talk through the scenario. You need someone who's going to be honest with you. You don't need someone who's going to pat your back. There's plenty of those people. They don't help you. They don't help you to develop into the leader that you are required to be as a professional within the U.S. Army. But as we now have shifted to the focus of development, it got me curious and it has made me actually dissatisfied with the model that I just showed you, which I helped create. Because I'm still unsure, in the lack of formal education, how do we develop our emotional capacity? We have K through 12, we have undergraduate, we have Army University. So your cognitive capacity is all right there. How do you develop your emotional capacity? And I spent a lot of time reflecting on my life's events and trying to understand what was it that really had the impact, had that slap in the face, where it's like, okay, this is your moment, this is your learning time, you have to do this emotion influence correctly or else. And honestly, a lot of it came from being a server, working with customers. Granted, motivation, money, but hey, it's 14 years old, right? I mean, give me a break. With that said, and I mentioned this before we even started this more formal discussion, is that at some point you need to transcend from being a leader in terms of thinking of yourself to being that selfless leader. And that is incredibly difficult. And my event was being beside my father from the moment that he got diagnosed with cancer through the end. I had to learn what it meant to be a manager of not only my own emotion, but also with my father. There is nothing harder that I have ever experienced, and I think that most people ever experience, to have a loved one lash out at you, essentially have an emotional hijack, and just lash out at you. And you have to be stoic, and then you have to be calming, and then you have to be reassuring. And all the while, just torn up, because this is your father. This was my father. I learned so much through that, and I credit him with my success for everything that I have achieved and become to this day. You learn exactly in moments like that who you are and your responsibilities. You learn how to put others ahead of yourself at any cost. It's difficult. I don't want any of you to go through something like that to understand and to become that selfless leader. And what I have started to do is try to understand what are alternative ways to develop emotion capacity without having such traumatic events within lives. And that's something I hope to be able to present within 5 years. I've put forth a lot of effort now to get at that. Because there's got to be a way to enable it. Because I honestly don't want any of you to go through that. So development is key. It is your responsibility to continue to develop. It is your responsibility from the time you put on the gold bar up to the point of potentially of 5 stars. You are what you decide to be. The book in front of you is full of blank pages, and it's up to you what you write in it. So make a decision. Don't be set to it. As I always say, I write things in pencil because life is not predictable. So you must be flexible. You must be adaptive. Cognitions, emotions, motivations. And with that said, I want to open the floor for questions because I've noticed that you guys are pretty inquisitive, and I'm hoping that there's something that I didn't touch on potentially enough or at all that you have questions about. Yes. Oh, time out. Who are you? Where are you from? Oh, we got microphones.
Thank you, sir. Ellis Johnson from Dickinson College. My question is about emotional generation, or eliciting emotional responses and completing something in someone you're working with. So have you found in your research or in your findings that humans become more resistant or are more easily convinced of things over the process of trying to elicit a response? So if I'm trying to convince you of something, or if I'm trying to get something out of you through emotional generation, if we do this multiple times, are you going to be more easily convinced each time, or am I going to have to elicit a stronger and stronger response to get it in the end?
That's a very good question. Essentially, do people build up resistance, or maybe people just have their resistance deconstructed, whatever it may be? I don't believe it's either which one. Primarily because even though I say that we are driven by cognitions, emotions, motivations, we also have the physical aspects to who we are. So some of the very important drivers in terms of affective responses and even cognitions is the amount of sleep, the stress level. True fact, the whole concept of hangry, have they eaten? All of it matters. And so I have not seen research on this, but I am willing to hypothesize is that if you engage the exact same person and there was some way that you could create a blank slate every time, and all you did was change either the physiological aspects to include yourself, because that is going to impact how you communicate that influence, but as well as the recipient of it, the end result will be different every time. And that is even before you throw in context. So opening it up into, maybe it's a private conversation and you go somewhere that's cozy, or you do it in a public setting to provide a sense of safety. I think all those also impact it. I don't believe that someone becomes either more or less susceptible of influence just based on the idea of exposure to it. There's more to it than that, norms, values, but I really think that physiological state impacts it a lot as well. Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. We actually have a mechanism here.
I'm from Illinois State University. My question is, I'll be earning a PsyD with a military specialty.
Okay.
And I was interested in how emotion management would affect clinical work and how it would play into the bigger role of treatment in everyday work.
Absolutely. And that's a very good question. So, true story. While I grounded my model, my framework, and the idea of emotions as an influence process for Army leaders, because of my friends who were wearing the uniform, and this was back in 2007, 2008, I was noticing and I was concerned about what would later be considered PTSD. And I started to wonder, what can we possibly do to kind of help prevent that happening? Whether or not it's to build up someone's resiliency or just in general provide an outlet. My research product that I designed, and you can find it, now you probably can't find it on DTIC. Technically it's there, it's just trying to find it. Google might be your best bet. And I will actually coordinate with the general to provide some citations and documents. It's all about providing care and consideration to your soldier in terms of having a daily check-in. The idea here is that every human has kind of a central homeostasis, allostasis standpoint, and that if you understand and you're able to identify when they stray a little bit out, it's a lot easier to kind of bring them back in. So if their stress level is starting to bring them down, or they had some family event, and at that point, all you need is some general counseling that, as a leader, is your responsibility to do, you may, in fact, prevent something much, much worse. Suicide, PTSD, whatever it may be. Now, all of that is actually in terms of what that training product is more geared towards garrison, or while you're in CONUS, or if you're OCONUS and you're one of the friendly bases, such as in Germany. As it comes to being actually deployed in a battlefield, my thought on it is that what you can do is that within the moment, when your primary responsibility is to get everyone back alive, number one objective to your mission, number two is all the other objectives. Might be wrong with the general, but that's okay. When it is all said and done and emotions don't have a place then, take the opportunity afterwards in the AAR to address them. Holy shit, I was scared out of my mind. I thought I was going to die. Did anyone else too, right? So bravado at that point doesn't help anyone because we are humans. Remember that. So I see what emotional intelligence can do as a way to hopefully intervene with that type of a need. So, and I encourage you to look into it. I actually talk with Army Resilient Director at ARD, as well as Walter Reed, in terms of what I have done. Walter Reed is primarily the agency focused on mental health. I'm focused on the human being in terms of the behavior and social sciences. Together, we are the complete soldier, and together we are trying to actually help in that type of area. That's a great question. Next.
Test. Good afternoon, sir. Cadet Ryan McKenzie, Norfolk State University. My question for you is, why do you believe that we have failed in terms of emotional intelligence, and what do you believe that we as future leaders can do to further the Army's understanding of emotional intelligence?
Okay. Clarification. When you say we failed, who's we?
I guess the institution and profession of the Army.
Okay. Failed's probably a harsh term here. They can do better. That's probably the political correct way of saying it. We can do a lot better. I can do better. We all can do better. The trouble is still trying to understand emotions. It's also the most difficult aspect in that probabilistic model that I'm trying to create. Emotions are very, very tricky. But we also don't have a good sense of how do we actually develop them, employ them, and create the best balance. So it's a work in progress. I have discussions with the Center of Army Leadership. They're very much interested in trying to put something out to help us start creating this ability-based model, increasing our skill sets, the whole development, even talking with Army University. But again, it is one thing for me to say from my own life experiences how I developed my emotional capacity, my management skills, my intelligence. And it's another thing to then try to, through the rigors of science, and to get it through policy to where we can confidently say that this will, in fact, enhance it. And that is the difficulty in all of that. So part of it is that we need better theory, conceptualizations. Part of it is maybe I just need extra money from Congress to bring together all the right people, lock them up in a room for 2 years, and let them produce something, which is never going to happen, but still. Although if the senator was here right now, I'd probably lobby with her on this one. But fail, no, we're learning. We're still learning. We haven't achieved. So remember what I said about the word failure. So we have not given up. We are not repeating the same mistakes. We just haven't gotten there yet. And maybe it's a grounded up concept that comes out of it. Maybe you guys create it. And then through your influence, as together, as cadre, and then as you ascend the ranks and get in the right roles, then maybe you are the ones who are able to create that.
Hannah McLeod, West Virginia University. You said human behavior is made up of cognition, emotions, and motivation. Do you think is one more prominent in each individual? Like, do you think it's genetically imprinted that one's more prominent, or do you think it's situational?
Good question. We know in terms of cognitions, as it relates to IQ, that we are born with like a maximum capacity. General Hughes brought that up yesterday. It's correct. Development along the way will get us to determine how close we reach that glass ceiling, if you will. In terms of emotional capacity, it is unclear to what degree it is impacted by traits versus states. And this is where research and the science gets a little washy because they love throwing out a bunch of terminologies. So when I say the word emotions, they have a specific terminology within science that I do. But then there's also affect, and then there's mood, and there's other words as well too. And some of those different terminology is thought to be more trait-based, so essentially part of your genetics and how you're born. And if you think about that, we as humans we're made up of our physiological features, which are very much driven by our genes, then that starts kind of making some sense. So in terms of motivation, yeah. There's the big debate about internal, external motivation, but there's not really research on the idea of whether or not nature or nurture on that too. What I do believe, though, is that no individual is complete without context, and I think it's the interaction that starts explaining it. Taking the approach that it's a mixture of both nature and nurture isn't a bad one if you think about, again, the physiological nature and the impact of that in terms of our processes. But that has my mind thinking. That's a good question.
University of Pennsylvania. I also wanted to ask about your model of human behavior. You spoke in the presentation about the roles of cognition and emotion, but I wanted to ask a little bit more about how you're operationalizing motivation. Specifically, like, is it a conscious aspiration or goal, or are you talking about like homeostatic drive in terms of motivation?
Actually, it's both, to be honest. So I think we have two layers. One is very much more homeostatic, which is working? No. Yeah. It's a fancy tie. Apparently it's slick, too. It's good material. Physiological processes seem to have implicit influence on how we do things. So in that case, I would say that is more of outside of our conscious area in terms of how it's impacting and driving our human behavior. But then we also explicitly have a motivation that we assign to things. I want to achieve. I want to have the very best PT score. I want to have a 4.0 or with weighted classes, 4 point whatever it is anymore. I want to be the best in my class, etc. So those are also very explicit goal-driven. The better that you are in tune with your physiological stasis, I believe would be an indicator of how much better you're able to not only predict your own human behavior, but then you can start actually predicting the behavior of others. Does that get more at your question, or do I need to elaborate a little bit more? That's good? Okay.
Chuck, Cadet Alexander Granillo, Northern Arizona University. You said every human emotes and that leaders, we must leverage it. But when someone's emotionally hijacked, how can we, as you said, bring them back down?
That's very dependent on the person. I heard in the Q&A yesterday the importance of to get to know your soldiers. So for every emotional hijack, it's going to be specific to that person to be most effective. Sometimes general Sometimes sometimes there's general activities you engage in. If it's, I'm just throwing it out there, if it's a tantrum, then if you think of what a parent does, it's what some parents do, I should say. Put a foot down, give them the look, and just command, cease, stop, keep crying, and then they move the child from the situation, which is a form of punishment. You could do that with a soldier, but if you know your soldier such that you are able to predict what caused it, then you can have more specific and strategies that you can employ towards that. Sometimes, depending on what it is, it could be empathy. It could simply be a command and then a discussion with afterwards / counseling. Those are actually the two big ones. Sometimes you just let it happen and let it fizzle out, but that's context dependent. If you're in a group and it's impacting the group dynamics, in my opinion, that's not acceptable. But that would be your judgment call as a leader. And sometimes bring in your partner's NCO because they spend a lot more time with the soldiers and they might have a better grasp of, well, what triggered it because it might, someone get mad over a stapler that's not properly stapling, there's probably something behind it. I mean, I get mad at like my computer mouse and everything else like that, but it's not, that was just like the tipping point, if you will. And so understanding that so that you can provide the right type of individualized consideration and counseling. But it starts with getting to know your soldier and definitely leverage your NCO.
Cara Hurtado, Mendoza, Puerto Rico. I have a question you based on the psychology definition of human development. So you mentioned that you're trying to find a way for future leaders and normal people to actually be aware of emotions. So why don't you propose to the Department of Health and Department of Education a public policy in which a course on psychology is introduced at their high school level? Why? Because I believe that the doubt of what is emotions, what is everything, is being introduced to us very late. So if we introduced it to our younglings, we attack that development phase that the psychology says that we actually are able to change people, and it's not done. So my question is, why don't we make a proposal to do a public policy?
I mean, why don't we? I mean, that's a good question, and I can't say this with complete confidence, but I suspect that's been proposed a few times over already, particularly given the increase of interest in it. And it doesn't, in my opinion, it shouldn't be high school. Children age 2, 3, 4 start developing their emotional skills. So based on Piaget's learning model, it's interesting. The sooner that we can actually introduce the concept of emotion management, in my opinion, better. I mean, at that point, we're introducing other types of formal education, whether or not it's to improve cognitions or if it's an athlete-based type intervention, if you will, too. But the emotion aspect on the side hasn't really caught up with it. And I still think a lot of it is that it's not as well understood as it is intelligence. We just don't have the psychometrics out there to fully understand what it is and to get that grasp. And part of what we're missing is, in my opinion, an integrative model that includes physiology, psychology, philosophy, and a host of other domains. But hopefully we can get there. But until we have that type of understanding, I'm not sure I would actually support a policy because I'm not sure the effectiveness. And in fact, we might do harm instead of good. So I think more that we need that push to create that understanding first to inform the policy.
Good morning, sir. My name is Mike Buck from Niagara University. As you know, in the Army, we break down responsibility of leadership, typically 3 to 5 people from team leader down, squad leader, team leaders, et cetera. I was wondering if in your research you found anything that would support maximizing your emotional intelligence with influence with similar numbers, or if there was a different ratio and prime number of using emotions to influence others.
That's a good question. So there's actually two parts to that as a complication when thinking about the Army. One is there's the numbers. So how is there kind of like our working memory? Is there a maximum number? Is there an average number? 7 plus minus 2. So in terms of people, is it the same way? The second part too is then you have different levels and you have the hierarchy. So you have within a squad, you have the squad leader, or if we just jump it up to the platoon, so you have a platoon leader, platoon sergeant, which is a dyadic leadership. And depending on power and status, you also have informal leadership within the group too. So it becomes really tricky. There's a term out there called emotional contagion, where think of it like the flu. That is some person, if a single person within a group experiences happiness, then the next person is likely to catch happiness, the next person will catch happiness, etc. And if it comes from someone of influence, whether or not in a formal or informal role, it increases the probability of that spreading. In essence, I'm not aware of any type of research out there that looks at a number game, and definitely not within an Army context that starts understanding the complexities of the nested nature of the Army leadership. So, got time for one more question.
At university, sir. Earlier we spoke on selfless leaders. In your opinion, how do you go about balancing managing your soldiers' emotions, keeping them first, but then also managing your own?
That is a fantastic question, and I'll tell you right now, you're asking the wrong person. It's more so that I don't know how to ever recharge my battery. I take on extra work to keep my subordinates happy, my scientists. I make sure that they don't get the mundane stuff that they hate to do. I take that on, either on a night or the weekend. Honestly, my balancing their emotions is when I get on a bicycle. So I've been riding a bike for 20 years, raced for a while around here, and that is my escape. That's my zen. That is my moment when I can just kind of forget things, and if I've had a bad day, I can hammer it out. And if I just want to cruise along, particularly along the Potomac, and check out some of the bald eagles, I can do that. And that's how I control my emotions. The other thing I have now done, because I've developed a relationship with my scientists, is that there are times when I actually don't have to mask, that they're okay with me not faking, that they're okay that I'm authentic. Because they recognize I'm human, and they also know what I'm trying to do for them. It's very difficult. To be selfless in nature is a sacrifice on your own part. At least that is what I've learned thus far. It has taken a toll on me, and that's no lie. And I've actually taken steps to try to improve that. I've actually seen a counselor, in fact. And I encourage each and every one of you, if you ever get to that point, don't be afraid and go talk to someone. There's nothing like paying someone to be your best friend, because you can say anything and everything, and they will never judge you as long as you just pay your bill. But I say that in jest, but they are extremely valuable. They hold a high importance. So they have helped me in numerous ways. My goal is to be a selfless leader. My goal is to empower those around me. My ultimate goal is to make sure that everyone around me succeeds at any cost. And the fact is, the cost has been on me, which is why I have sought counseling to help me not actually fall down into that hole. So be aware of what your own activities do. Be sure you have a support group, friends, family. Don't be afraid to go see a counselor. Every post has one. They're fantastic. They love helping you. So, and they're very knowledgeable. With that, I'm going to have to wrap it up. I'm going to say two quick things. I'm going to assume you guys came across Highway 92, which probably doesn't mean too much to you. But try to get someone who knows the geography. So I used to live in this area, and coming across 92, you cross the Platte River Bridge. And as I came across, and I don't know how many of you guys noticed, there was a bald eagle there just chilling in the tree. Magnificent sight. It's a reminder, the symbol of this nation. If you get a chance, tomorrow morning as you come in, they're usually there dawn and dusk. Take a look, see if there's one in a tree. Never get tired seeing those. And so, number 2, I will be around, bouncing around today, tomorrow. I'll be at the dinner tonight. I'll be at the dinner tomorrow night. I open myself up to each and every one of you. If you have additional questions, come find me. I'm happy to talk at any point. Don't lose my information down the road. You can always find me in the global email address. So if I can't help you, chances are I know someone who can. With that, I salute each and every one of you. You put on a uniform. You look good in it. Be proud of it. Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Hey, look, something you're going to learn. And the reason that we do this here at Fort Leavenworth is because we want you to see how important education is. You will see training, training, training. My wife is more like this. That's why she is my... Can you hear me now? We always talk about training in the Army. Okay, training this, training that. You know, you're back in your units, you're back at your schools, you'll be training, training, training. We forget about education. And so through the course of your military career, as I told you yesterday, no matter how far you go, every couple of years we're going to take you out of that tactical environment, we're going to stick you into an academic environment to improve your cognitive abilities, your motivational abilities, and the things that these two academics have helped us to continue to evolve through the use of science and research and technology. People like me come together with people like this. We bring experiential learning and we bring education together through academia. And that's why the Army has done many, many things in the world of science and advancements of technology and in education. And that's why you're here at the Army University, because education is critical and paramount to the success of our Army to do our nation's bidding. So in light of that, we will always mix in any sort of forum that you go to, experiential learning and academia. These two individuals up here have done a tremendous amount of work behind the scenes. And they have done a lot of things to influence the curriculum that most of you will not have a chance to reap the benefits from, but your MS2s and your MS3s that are on your tail will. They'll begin to receive this as early as possible. And as stated, this is something that will evolve over time, not just in the world of academia and in the doctrine of the United States Army, but in you as you develop as a leader. So always remember it and put it in your kit bag of tricks to step back, because you might find yourself someday in a situation where Army doctrine, where Army tactics will tell you to do one thing very clearly. It will say, if this happens, you do this. And if your instincts as a leader say that won't work, you must have the intestinal fortitude to do the right thing. We say that all the time. Always do the right thing. But we never remind you that doing the right thing is always difficult. You assume all the risk and responsibility associated with that act. It is normally unpopular to those you lead. because it's normally the road traveled. So, having said all that, I want to make sure you understand the reason we're going to award these two individuals is because they have been integral in making sure that we scientifically attempt to prove what us practitioners think is real. Post the orders.
Please remain seated while I read the citations. The Commander's Award for Civilian Service is awarded to Dr. Gregory Ruark for superior achievement while supporting the Mission Command Workshop from April through September 2017. Dr. Ruark researched, prepared, and delivered emotional intelligence keynote address to over 300 participants, was a critical member of the design, development, and facilitation team that created and delivered the emotional intelligence training during the Mission Command Workshop. His performance is in keeping with the highest traditions of the Army, Civilian Corps, and reflects great credit upon himself, the United States Army Cadet Command, and the United States Army. Signed, Christopher P. Hughes, Major General Commanding. The Commander's Award for Civilian Service is awarded to Mrs. Patricia Callahan for superior achievement while supporting the Mission Command Workshop from April through September 2017. Ms. Callahan was a critical team member in the research, design, development, and delivery of emotional intelligence small group training to 300 participants at the Mission Command Workshop 2017. Her effort and ability to work with the team to develop better cadre was vital. Her performance is keeping with the highest traditions of the Army, Civilian Corps, and reflects great credit upon herself, United States Army Cadet Command, and the United States Army. Signed, Major General Christopher P. Hughes, Commanding. Okay, I got 10:07. We'll resume at 10:17, so be back in your seats at 10:15. Thank you.